Okay, so I'm going to tell you this in order, because you keep interrupting, and I need you to hear the whole thing before you react, because your reactions have been, yes, I know it sounds insane. Start from the beginning. 2 in the morning, Wednesday. I'm still awake because I finished the project late, and I'm one of those people where once I hit that second wind, I can't turn it off. So I'm on the couch with the laptop and the TV on low, not even watching it, just noise. And someone knocks on my door. Not the intercom. My front door, which meant someone was already in the building. I know my landlord. His name is Walt. He's 60-something. He's been the super for this building for 22 years. And in the 2 years I've lived here, I have had 3 interactions with him. When I moved in and he walked me through the utilities. When the kitchen faucet had a drip and he fixed it inside 48 hours. And when my neighbor locked herself out and I called him for the number to the emergency locksmith. That's it. 3 interactions in 2 years. He is a quiet man who does his job competently and is not given to drama. He was standing at my door at 2 in the morning looking like a man who had just seen something he didn't understand, which I know sounds like an exaggeration, but it isn't. He had a flashlight in his hand. He still had the flashlight. He had been using it wherever he'd come from and had come directly here without putting it away. He said, "Don't sleep in your bedroom tonight. I need you to trust me on this." Subscribe here because you need to hear what he showed me before you understand why I'm calling you at 7 in the morning instead of sleeping. Subscribe and stay. I said, "Walt, what is going on?" He said, "I don't want to alarm you. I'm working on something and I need you out of that room. Can you sleep on the couch tonight?" And then, and this is the part where I knew it was real, because Walt does not do this. Walt is as undemonstrative as it is possible for a person to be. He looked at me and said, "You have cameras in here, right? The system you put in after the thing." He knew about the cameras because I had told the building office when I installed them, 18 months ago. I put a note in with my rent because it seemed like the right thing to do. Someone had access to the building and I was adding a camera system. They should know. Walt had filed it, or remembered it. In 22 years, he has probably filed and remembered a lot of things about a lot of tenants. He said, "Pull up the one on the vent in the bedroom. Pull it up now." My camera system has 4 units. Kitchen, living room, front door, and the one on the bedroom ceiling vent that I put there, specifically because of the robbery 2 years ago, when someone came through a window and I could not for the life of me figure out how they had gotten from the window to my closet without triggering the motion sensors I already had, and the answer was, they had come through the vent system. So I put a camera on the vent, not pointed at the room, pointed up at the vent. Infrared, motion triggered, stored in the cloud. I pulled up the app. Walt watched over my shoulder. The vent camera's infrared mode lit up the feed in green-gray. And in the upper right quadrant of the frame, where the vent opening met the shaft that led upward through the crawl space between my ceiling and the floor of the unit above me, there was a shape. Not the vent, not insulation. A shape that was warm. Warmer than the surrounding material in a way that insulation is not. A shape with a slow, regular quality to its movement that I recognized, after about 3 seconds of looking, as breathing. Something was alive in my ceiling. "You're doing the thing where you make the noise and I need you to keep listening." I said to Walt, "What is that?" He said, "I was up on the roof tonight. There was a repair I've been putting off on the exterior flashing. The weather has been good this week. I went up to do it at midnight because I like to work late when the tenants are sleeping, and I don't have to worry about noise. And when I got up there," he stopped. He was deciding how much to tell me while also looking at my phone screen. "There is an access point. Between the roof level and the crawl space. Someone has been using it. Someone had been using an access point in my building's exterior." I said, "For how long?" He said, "I found a sleeping bag up there, and some other things. It's not recent." Not recent. A sleeping bag and some other things in the crawl space above my bedroom ceiling. Not recent. Here is the honest answer about how frightened I was. Not in the way you'd expect. What I felt was not the acute fear of a movie moment. It was a slower thing, more like the specific disorientation that comes when something you thought was one kind of situation reveals itself to be a different kind. My ceiling, which I had been underneath every night for 2 years, had contained something I did not know about. That is a specific quality of wrongness that takes a moment to settle into the body. Walt called 911. He made the call outside my door in the hallway because he didn't want to make it inside the apartment. I think so that whoever was in the ceiling couldn't hear us through the vent. He spoke quietly and specifically. Address, situation, nature of the concern. He was good on the phone. It occurred to me that in 22 years of being a building super, Walt had probably made calls like this before. We waited in the hallway. At 2:15, while we were waiting, I heard it. A creak. From inside my apartment. From the direction of the bedroom. Not loud. Not dramatic. Soft protesting noise of a person shifting their weight somewhere overhead. The kind of sound an old building makes when it moves. Except that this building had been making that sound my whole 2 years here, and I knew what it sounded like when it was the building versus when it was something else. And this was something else. Slow and deliberate. The creak of something positioned and repositioning. Something awake. Walt and I looked at each other. He put his hand on my arm briefly, not to restrain me, but the way you touch someone to say, I know. I heard it too. Police arrived in 11 minutes. 4 officers. They went up to the roof first to secure the access point, and then 2 of them went into my apartment through the crawl space. They used the hatch in the utility closet that I didn't know I had, which Walt showed them, which I also apparently have. And what they found, in the space between my bedroom ceiling and the floor of the unit above me, was a man. His name I found out in pieces. Some from the officers, and some from the officer who stayed to take my full statement. I will call him R. He was 47 years old. He had been living in the crawl space between my ceiling and the floor above for 6 weeks. His things, which the officers photographed and documented. A sleeping bag, a battery-powered camp lantern, a bag of food that included canned goods and crackers, and a jar of peanut butter, a water bottle, a phone charger that he had plugged into a junction box in the wall that he had located in the dark and accessed without disrupting anything, a paperback book, a small notebook, a library card in a plastic sleeve. He had, in 6 weeks, taken nothing from the building, touched nothing that wasn't already there, damaged nothing. He had found a junction box and used it, and that was the extent of his impact on the building's infrastructure. He had been, for 6 weeks, as contained and as quiet as it is possible for a person to be in 16 inches of space. He had been homeless since September. He had lost a job and then an apartment in the sequence that sequence goes. And he had been in shelters, and then not in shelters, and then, at some point in October, on a day I cannot determine because nobody can determine it, he had found the gap in my building's exterior flashing, and he had gone up, and he had found that the crawl space was dry and insulated, and large enough, and he had come back with a sleeping bag. He had chosen the space above my apartment, the officers thought, because the apartment below it, mine, was occupied during the day in a pattern consistent with someone working from home, which meant the floor above him would be occupied and active and warm during daytime hours, and because the occupant came to bed late. He had listened to my schedule for 6 weeks. He knew when I left the living room and when I came to the bedroom, and when my light went out. He had chosen me because I am a night owl who is predictable about it. He had 6 weeks of data on my habits. That is the part that I keep returning to, and it sits differently every time I return to it. I need you to stay with me through this next part because I know what you're going to say, and I want to say something first. When the officers brought him out through my apartment, through the utility closet hatch I hadn't known I had, which Walt showed them, which I apparently had the whole time, I was in the hallway. I had been asked to wait in the hallway. I was in the hallway. He came through the front door of my apartment with an officer on either side, not holding him but flanking him, and he had the sleeping bag under one arm and the library bag in his other hand, and he was cooperative in the way of someone who has been cooperative the whole time, who had not fought it, who had come through the hatch when they asked him to come through the hatch. He was not what I expected. I don't know what I expected. I had been thinking, for the 40 minutes since Walt knocked on my door, in the direction of threat. Unknown, dangerous, possibly armed, the fear that a person in your ceiling produces before you know anything about the person. What I saw was a man in a gray sweatshirt who was very tired and who looked, when he came through my apartment door and into the hallway and into the light, not afraid but relieved. relief. I want to say this carefully because I don't want to overstate what I saw, but that is what it looked like to me. A specific quality? Someone who has been managing something very difficult for a long time and has arrived at the end of it. Like 6 weeks of being very quiet and very still and very careful had been exhausting in a way that getting caught couldn't make worse. He didn't look at me. He looked at the floor, and then at the elevator, and then the officers moved, and he moved with them, and that was the last time I saw him. I'm not telling you I wasn't angry. I was angry. Violation of it. The not knowing. The 42 nights of 16 inches above my head while I was asleep. That anger is legitimate, and I sat with it for a while, and I still sit with it sometimes. His taking nothing and damaging nothing, and was by every available measure trying to be invisible, does not fully dissolve the violation. I want to be honest about that. I'm also telling you that when I sat down on my couch at 4 a.m. to give my statement to the officer who stayed, I was feeling more than anger, something complicated. What happens when the source of the fear turns out to be a person who needed somewhere to be so badly that they found a gap in a wall and moved in? He went to a shelter that night. I don't know what happened after that. One of the officers, a woman who was the last to leave, and who had the specific quality of someone who has done this before, and retained their capacity to be human about it, told me that depending on the circumstances he might face charges for trespassing, might not, that it depended on a lot of things. She gave me a card. She said if I wanted to make a statement about how I wanted to proceed, I could call the number. I called the number the next day. I said I did not want to press charges. You can do what you need to do on the property owner side, that's for Walt in the building. But from my side as the tenant, I don't want to press charges. The person I spoke to said, okay, just okay, very neutral. That's your right, and it's been noted. I don't know if it made any difference. I don't know what the outcome was. What I know is that for 6 weeks there was a man 47 years old with a library card living in 16 inches of space above my bedroom, and he left my ceiling cleaner than he found it, and I am still processing what I want to do with all of that. Walt knocked on my door at 8 a.m. I had not slept. I was on the couch with a cold cup of coffee when I heard his knock, which is different from other knocks in a way I can now identify, and which I am not sure how I feel about that. He told me he had fixed the exterior access point, sealed it, properly this time. Not just the repair he'd been planning, but a full secure close on the gap. He said a contractor was coming to inspect the crawl space that afternoon to confirm structural integrity and ensure nothing had been interfered with. He said the building manager had been notified and had offered to have someone come speak with me if I wanted. He looked better than he had at 2 a.m. No flashlight this time. He looked like a man who had done the thing he needed to do and had come to report on it. He said, "I'm sorry I frightened you." I said, "You came and knocked on my door. That's not frightening me. That's the opposite." He looked at me for a moment, with the expression of someone processing a reframe they had not considered. Then he nodded. He said if I needed anything, I knew where to find him. He left to go fix something else, which is what Walt does, because something in this building always needs fixing, and Walt has been the person who fixes it for 22 years. Here is the thing I want you to hold before you tell me how insane this is, because I know you're going to tell me how insane it is, and you're right, but that's not the thing I keep coming back to. Walt was on a roof at midnight. November, in the cold, with a flashlight, fixing exterior flashing that he had been putting off because the weather hadn't cooperated, and this week it finally had. He was doing maintenance at midnight because he has been doing this building for 22 years, and he knows when to do things that require quiet. And he found a sleeping bag. His first move, before he called 911, before he called the building manager, before he did anything procedural, was to come down from the roof and knock on my door of the tenant whose bedroom was directly below the crawl space. At 2 a.m, to get me out of that room before he knew what was in it, and to make sure I wasn't alone with whatever he was about to find out. He could have called the police from the roof. He could have let the whole thing happen as a building matter that I heard about in the morning from an incident report. He could have done what a lot of people in his position would reasonably do, which is manage it through the appropriate channels and inform the affected tenant afterward. He knocked on my door first, because I was in that room, and he had been in this building for 22 years and he knew which room I slept in, and he knew someone had been living above it, and he came down and knocked first. That is not a small thing. That is a man who has spent 22 years in this building accumulating a specific knowledge of the people in it, and who, when that knowledge became relevant at midnight on a November roof, used it to knock on my door at 2 in the morning before he called anyone else. 22 years. A gap in some flashing. A knock at 2 in the morning. That is what I keep coming back to. I slept on the couch that night. Except I did not sleep. I sat on the couch in the specific way of sitting after something has happened that you have not yet finished processing, which is not sleep and is not quite wakefulness, but is a third thing that the body does when it is too tired to do the work of processing and too alert to stop trying. I thought about the library card. I keep coming back to that, I don't know why exactly, but I keep coming back to the library card. A man who has a library card, who keeps it in a plastic sleeve in his bag in the crawl space above someone's bedroom, who is still going to the library while living in a gap in a building. What does he check out? What does he read in 16 inches of space with a battery lantern? What does the person at the library checkout desk think when he comes in, if they think anything, which they probably don't because that is what libraries are, places where nobody asks why you're there. I thought about the heat signature on the camera, a warm shape in the upper right quadrant of the frame, the slow, regular quality of breathing, the way I had looked at it for 3 seconds before I understood what I was looking at. I thought about 42 nights. 42 times I had gone to my bedroom and gotten into bed and turned out the light and been asleep in the same building with someone who was not supposed to be there and who was being very, very careful not to be noticed. And how on night 42, Walt had gone up to the roof with a flashlight to fix the flashing and had found the sleeping bag. It was 4:30 when the last officer left. It was 5:15 when the building started to come back to life around me. Sounds from the unit above, the elevator, someone's alarm. Normal building morning. I made coffee I didn't drink. When the light came in through the kitchen window and the ceiling caught it the way it always catches morning light, it looked exactly like it always looks. Just a ceiling. White, slightly water-stained in one corner from a leak 3 years before I moved in. A ceiling I have looked at every morning for 2 years. I looked at it for a long time. Subscribe if this one found you. And tell me in the comments about a time the thing you were frightened of turned out to be a person, and what you did with the complicated feeling that followed. Those are the ones I want to read. They are harder to talk about than the straightforward ones, and that is exactly why they are worth talking about. Be afraid when you have reason to be, and then look at what you're afraid of. Sometimes it's a man with a library card who needed somewhere to sleep. I don't know what the right response to that is. I am still figuring it out. Here is what I want to say about fear and compassion, because I think they are the thing people will expect me to resolve by the end of this, and I want to be honest that I haven't. I was frightened. The frightened was real and appropriate, and the kind of fear that serves a purpose. It kept me in the hallway instead of opening my bedroom door at 2:15 when I heard the creak, which in retrospect was the right call and which I am glad I made. Fear, when it arrives with good information, is useful. It is the body's correct response to a situation that warrants caution. And then the fear got better information. And the better information was a 47-year-old man with a library card and a peanut butter jar who had chosen a crawl space over a shelter because something about a shelter had not been available or workable or safe for him, and who had been 16 inches above my head for 6 weeks being as quiet as he could be. That is not a monster. That is a person in a very bad situation making a very desperate choice. And the fear I felt was real, and the desperation I was looking at was also real, and I do not know how to make those two things sit comfortably next to each other, and I have decided that not knowing is probably the honest place to be. I don't press charges. That is what I decided. I do not know if it made any practical difference. I do not know what happened to R. I know that the library card was in a plastic sleeve, which means he was taking care of it, which means the library mattered to him, which means, I don't know what it means. I just notice it. Subscribe if this one reached you. Tell me in the comments about a time the complicated thing was the real thing, and how you sat with it. Those conversations are the ones I want to have. Be afraid when you need to be, and then look at what you're afraid of. Sometimes the looking changes things. Sometimes you're still sitting with it 6 weeks later, on a couch, with cold coffee, looking up at a ceiling that looks exactly like it always did. That's okay. That's where I am. That's where I'm going to be for a while. Walt is downstairs right now. I can hear him in the utility room, which I could always hear, but which I hear differently now. I'm glad he's there. Okay. That's the whole thing. You can react now. Some things you hear differently once you know. I hear the utility room differently now. I hear everything in this building differently. I do not think that will stop.